in general, I don't use wrist vibrato at all, because wrist is too slow and too wobbly. When you move your wrist, it seldom sounds good.
What? So if you're any type of connoisseur of violin YouTube, I'm sure you have at least seen the thumbnail to this video in your sidebar, or have at least watched it many times already. And really, 90% of that video is just good, solid vibrato advice compiled together in one nice tight package. But nobody really cared about that. What you really cared about was this particular quote by former Minnesota concertmaster and Heifetz student Adam Han-Gorski.
This position, there is no way you can vibrate holding the third finger like this.
Oh.
Well, you are doing wrist vibrato right now.
So that's the thing.
Which I don't, because wrist is too slow and too wobbly. When you move your wrist, first of all, the intonation suffers. It seldom sounds good.
Why would somebody of that level of experience and pedagogical background say something so incredibly ludicrous? Unless he actually has a point. Maestro Han-Gorski is an incredibly accomplished violinist, and though he is retired now at the age of 83 or 84, and quite frankly sounds like he's retired, he still deserves your respect, and you should not just throw away what he has to say just because it sounds a bit ridiculous on its face. So firstly, let's investigate why would any violinist say you should categorically not use wrist vibrato. After all, a not insignificant number of violinists throughout history have used primarily wrist vibrato. For a short list, we have Schering, Elman, Oistrach, Itzhak Perlman, Hilary Hahn, and many, many others. I personally have found that switching from arm vibrato to primarily wrist vibrato was one of the best decisions I ever made. I actually find that I have a lot more control when I use wrist vibrato. But even so, Han-Gorski is actually getting to something a little bit deeper, that an improper understanding of vibrato can actually obscure your sound more than enhance it. So let's first discuss what vibrato actually is. To start with, we have a pitch. I'll take this D here. And then we're supposed to flatten the pitch. And then we raise the pitch back to its original state. And we do that over and over and over again. Now, I'm sure that is not news to any of you watching this video, but why does vibrato function this way? Why do we flatten the pitch? Why don't we go sharp and then go back to the pitch? Or why don't we go around the pitch? Why is it always flattening and then going back up to the original pitch? Well, for whatever reason, when we hear someone vibrating, the human ear perceives that top of the vibration to be the principal pitch. That means that even if your starting note was in tune, if you decided to try to vibrate up, you would actually hear that higher note that you're moving up to as the principal pitch, not your starting note. This means that even if your starting note is in tune, if on the upswing of the vibrato you consistently go over the principal pitch, the audience is going to perceive you as playing sharp. This is where Adam Han-Gorski's animus towards wrist vibrato starts to make some sense. It's very easy to over-widen your vibrato using the wrist, which creates a very unfocused sound, and as Mr. Han-Gorski says,
first of all, the intonation suffers.
And that last point is where I really want to focus on. How many of us are super careful at making sure that the vibrato upswing hits the exact same spot every single time? It's actually not the easiest thing to do, and it generally does not happen automatically with most violinist vibrato. It's something that you need to actively practice. So to demonstrate this idea, and you can and should try this after I demonstrate it, I will start with that D I did earlier because it matches the open D string, which makes it very easy to tune. So find that perfect unison as much as you possibly can. I'm using the second finger, I'm in third position, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to very slowly flatten the pitch in a wider vibrato motion, but be very careful as I come back up to stop exactly on the D unison. Right? Let's give it a go. So basically, that is what the vibrato motion should be, except extremely sped up. Now, if you've never tried this before and you're listening very carefully and being honest with yourself, you're going to probably find that getting the finger to stop exactly on the correct pitch is actually a lot more difficult than it seems. It's very easy for the finger, even at this very slow tempo, to land a little bit above the original pitch. Now, think of doing this in vibrato where you're not just trying to land at the exact place you started at once, but several times a second. If you do practice this with your wrist vibrato, you're going to discover that you have to narrow down your vibrato a lot. Very similar to the type of vibrato of Adam Han-Gorski and his teacher Heifetz. What this produces is an incredibly focused and resonant vibrato that will truly enhance your tone. Perhaps more importantly, will greatly improve your ear and your intonation by forcing you to listen very closely to exactly what part of the pitch your vibrato is at any given moment. Now, I'm sure you've heard a teacher say at some point, don't use vibrato to try and cover up your bad intonation. But the inverse is also true. Don't let your vibrato cover up your good intonation. In fact, practicing vibrato in this way will help you improve your ear and your finger's general accuracy. So while I don't certainly agree with Adam Han-Gorski on the principle of never use wrist vibrato, he still has a valid point about vibrato generally. Also, if any of you are wondering what my personal opinion is on Tonebase, because I no longer work for them and they are not paying me to say anything, they're great. They're great. I actually really like the work they do. I don't always keep a subscription to Tonebase, but if they have something that I think is interesting, I will actually pay up for about a month and watch it. And if I don't find anything more interesting, I'll cancel my subscription and then maybe come back a few months later. They're not sponsoring me. They're not paying me to say this, but I really think they have some great content. And the full interview with Han-Gorski is worth at least a month subscription to go watch. But onto people that actually do sponsor me, let's talk about Tonebase. Practice your music with a great orchestra in the comfort of your own home using Tonebase, the best practice tool since the invention of the metronome. Tonebase has a massive library of scores with recorded accompaniment from the Deutsche Grammophon library, which means you can play your music with a great orchestra or pianist anytime you want. For example, about Tonebase is you can do that at any tempo. Don't have your Mendelssohn up to tempo yet? No problem. You can slow the tempo down to whatever works for you, and the quality of the recording will not be diminished. Tonebase is offering a 14-day free trial, no strings attached, to my audience. So use my link in the description to take your practicing to the next level. And now, back to the video. Now, while I do find some of what Han-Gorski says to be a little bit eccentric, I kind of think that saying things like, former Heifetz student doesn't know what he's talking about when it comes to the violin, is at the very least a bit silly. And maybe if we took the time to understand exactly what he was getting at, we might actually learn something. Now, as an addendum, I do want to talk a little bit about widening our vibrato, because I don't actually believe that you should only have really thin vibrato all the time, even though that is how Heifetz tended to play, and that's also how Han-Gorski plays. There might be a time where you actually want to have maybe not quite so incredibly focused vibrato. There, my vibrato is certainly going past the exact point of the principle of the intonation of each note, yet it doesn't really obscure the intonation, and in fact I think adds the appropriate color to that passage. The idea in widening the vibrato this way is that you are not always hitting the exact same spot above your principal pitch. And you're only going enough above that principal pitch to kind of add a little bit of color, not to change the audience's perception of where the pitch is. This does not produce as focused of a vibrato as we were working on earlier, but if you have the level of control over your vibrato where you can make the note always hit the top pitch, then when you start to bend that rule a little bit, you will actually be able to produce a much more focused, colored vibrato than what you could have done previously. That's why I think when practicing vibrato in scales, or just generally, it's a very good idea to perfect the ability to get right up to the note as much as possible, and then when you're trying to add color to pieces, you'll have a lot more control over just how far over the principal note you're going to go, giving you much more control over a variety of colors in your vibrato in your playing. Anyway, I've been Tobias Murphy for Murphy Music Academy, always here to remind you there is no pleasure in mediocrity. Happy practicing, and I'll see you next time.